I'm Brenda, 32 female. I'm a captain in the U.S. Army, currently stationed at a forward operating base in a part of the world that's mostly dust and shades of brown. My life is structured by routines, regulations, and the constant, low-grade hum of readiness. This story, however, isn't about my life here. It's about how everything I thought was safe and sacred back home was dismantled by the one person I should have been able to trust implicitly, my own sister. It's a story about a betrayal that crossed oceans, and how a forgotten detail in a legal document became my only weapon for justice. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails, it was the repository of my entire childhood. Tucked away in the dense green forests of the Pacific Northwest, it was the one place on Earth that felt permanent. Our father, a man who believed in building things with his own two hands, constructed it on a plot of land his grandfather had bought a century ago. Every summer of my youth was spent there. I remembered the scent of pine needles after a rainstorm, the sting of a scraped knee from climbing the granite boulders by the creek, and the taste of marshmallows burnt to a perfect crisp over a crackling fire. Dad taught me how to fish in that creek, how to identify constellations in the vast, unpolluted night sky, and how to properly stack a cord of wood for the winter. My sister, Jessica, experienced the same cabin, but it seemed she stored the memories in a different part of her heart. 4 years my junior, she always treated our rustic escape as an inconvenience. While I was learning to tie a bowline knot, she was complaining about the lack of cell service. While I was mesmerized by a doe and her fawn at the edge of the woods, she was scrolling through a cached social media feed on her phone, desperate for a connection to the world she felt she was missing. To me, the cabin was a connection. To her, it was a disconnection. Our parents passing 5 years ago didn't change that dynamic, it only amplified it. In their will, they left the cabin to both of us jointly. It was their legacy, a tangible piece of their love they'd entrusted to their daughters. My half was a sacred trust. To Jessica, it seemed her half was just an asset, a line item on a balance sheet she was eager to cash out. Before this deployment, my third in 10 years, we'd had the conversation again. I was packing my duffel bags, the familiar scent of camouflage fabric and sterile military-issue gear filling my small apartment. Jessica sat on my couch, endlessly tapping on her phone screen. "You know," she began, not looking up, "we could get a lot for the cabin now. The market is insane." I stopped folding a t-shirt and looked at her. Her hair was a shade of blonde I knew wasn't natural, and her nails were immaculately manicured, a stark contrast to my own, which were kept short and practical. "Jess, we're not selling the cabin," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "It was Mom and Dad's, it's ours." She finally looked up, a practiced pout on her lips. "It's half mine, Brenda, and my half is just sitting there rotting. It's a money pit, the property taxes alone." "I pay the property taxes," I interrupted. "And the insurance, and for the guy who clears the fallen trees in the winter. I handle all of it, and I'm happy to. All you have to do is not sell it." She sighed dramatically, the sigh of a martyr. "Fine, but one day you'll have to see that it's just a building. It's not Dad." That conversation echoed in my mind as I sat in my bunk, thousands of miles from those cool, green forests. The air here was thick with heat and the smell of diesel. My only connection to that world was a small, fading photograph I kept tucked into the frame of my narrow cot. It was of the 4 of us on the cabin's porch. I was about 10, missing a front tooth and grinning proudly with a small trout I'd caught. Jessica, 6, was already looking away from the camera, more interested in a butterfly that had landed on the railing. Mom and Dad stood behind us, their arms around each other, their faces etched with a simple, profound happiness. That photograph was my anchor. It was the why behind the grueling days, the long nights, the sacrifices. It was the image of the home I was serving to protect, a symbol of the peace I fought to preserve for others. I believed, with a soldier's naive conviction, that while I was out here holding the line, the things I cherished back home were being held for me. I couldn't have been more wrong. The foundation I was standing on, both literally and figuratively, was about to crumble, and the demolition was being orchestrated by my own sister. The betrayal wasn't just about property or money. It was about the erasure of memory, the desecration of a legacy, and the severing of the last real bond I thought we shared. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of our parents I had left, and Jessica had put a price tag on it. Mail call on a deployment is a lifeline. It's a tangible link to a world that continues to spin without you, a reminder of the life you're waiting to return to. Usually, it's a welcome distraction, a brief respite from the relentless operational tempo. But the email that arrived on a Tuesday evening wasn't a respite, it was a detonation. The subject line was deceptively simple. "Quick cabin update." It was from Jessica. I clicked it open, expecting another complaint about the cost of a new water heater or a passive-aggressive hint about selling. What I read instead sucked the air from my lungs and made the cramped, metallic confines of my quarters feel like a coffin. "Hey Bren," it began with a breezy nonchalance that felt like a slap. "Hope you're staying safe over there. Exciting news on my end. I finally took the plunge and sold the cabin. Got a fantastic offer from a lovely family, the Petersons. They absolutely fell in love with it. The closing was last week, so it's all official. I know we've talked about it, and you were always a bit sentimental, but it was just the practical thing to do. The money is going to be a huge help for me to finally launch my new lifestyle brand. I've already wired your half to your account. You should see it in a few days. Talk soon. Zoxo, Jess." I read it once, then twice. The words swam on the screen, refusing to form a coherent reality. Sold the cabin. Closing was last week. All official. Each phrase was a hammer blow. My hands started to shake. I could feel a cold dread spreading through my chest, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the desert outside. I clicked over to my online banking portal, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. There it was, a pending wire transfer for an amount that made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a lot of money, more than I'd ever seen in one place. But it felt like blood money. It was the liquidated value of my childhood, the cash equivalent of my father's craftsmanship and my mother's garden. For a moment, I was paralyzed by a feeling of complete and utter powerlessness. I was in a different hemisphere, a dozen time zones away, living a life dictated by military orders. What could I possibly do? I couldn't just hop on a plane. I couldn't drive to the county registrar's office. I couldn't confront Jessica face-to-face and demand to know how she could do this. She knew I was deployed. She knew I was gone for another 7 months. She had waited, calculatingly, until I was physically incapable of stopping her. The betrayal was staggering in its cruelty. She hadn't just sold a piece of property. She had taken a piece of my soul and sold it to the highest bidder without my consent. My mind raced, trying to find a foothold in the swirling chaos. How was this even possible? The property was in both our names. A sale would require both our signatures. Then a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus with horrifying clarity. Before my first deployment, years ago, my father had sat me down. "Brenda," he'd said, his voice serious, "while you're overseas, someone needs to be able to handle your affairs here if something comes up. A pipe bursts, a bank issue. Anything?" He had suggested I grant Jessica a limited power of attorney. I was young, and it seemed like a sensible precaution. I remembered going to a notary with Jessica, signing a document that felt like a mere formality. It was supposed to be for emergencies, for paying a bill on my behalf or dealing with a landlord. It was never, ever intended to be a weapon she could use to sever me from our family's history. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was an emotion I was trained to control, to channel, but this was different. This wasn't professional. It was personal. It was the deep, primal anger of a child whose most cherished possession had been stolen and broken. She had used a tool meant for my protection to execute the ultimate betrayal. She had used my trust as a key to lock me out of my own life. I looked at the fading photograph on my cot, my father's proud smile, my mother's gentle eyes. They had trusted us both to be stewards of their legacy. I had honored that trust. Jessica had set it on fire for a down payment on a lifestyle brand. The powerlessness I felt began to recede, replaced by something else, something cold and hard and resolute. She thought because I was thousands of miles away, I was helpless. She thought the distance was her shield. She was about to find out that distance doesn't stop a soldier when they have a mission. And my new mission was to take back what was mine. For the next 48 hours, I operated in a fog of controlled fury. During the day, I performed my duties with mechanical precision, coordinating supply convoys, tracking shipments, signing requisitions. My commanding officer noted my focus, mistaking my icy resolve for professionalism. But in the slivers of downtime, in the dead of night when the base was quiet except for the distant hum of generators, my mind was a whirlwind of legal jargon and desperate strategy. The power of attorney. That was the key. She couldn't have sold it without that document. It had to be the legal mechanism she used to forge my consent. I spent hours on the base's satellite internet, the connection painfully slow and unreliable. I searched for the standard power of attorney forms for our home state. The language was dense, a thicket of legalese designed to be impenetrable. But I was a logistics officer. My entire job was about navigating complex systems and finding clarity in chaos. I read every clause, every subsection, every piece of fine print. I was looking for a crack, a flaw, any seam I could pry open. The document I had signed was a durable power of attorney, which meant it remained in effect even if I became incapacitated. It gave my agent, Jessica, broad powers to act on my behalf in financial and property matters. It seemed ironclad. Despair began to creep back in, a cold and heavy blanket. And then I saw it. It was a single sentence in a section I had scanned over a dozen times, a piece of boilerplate text that most people would ignore. It was under a heading titled Jurisdiction and Governing Law. The clause read, "This power of attorney shall be governed by the laws of the state of our home state and is intended to be valid in all jurisdictions within the United States of America." Within the United States of America. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read it again, my eyes tracing the shape of each letter, within the United States. I was not in the United States. I was on a military base on foreign soil. A U.S. military base is considered U.S. territory for many legal purposes, but was it for the execution of a state-level power of attorney? This was the thread. It was thin, almost invisible, but it was there. My next thought was of Robert Vance. Mr. Vance had been my father's best friend since they were kids. He was a semi-retired corporate lawyer, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. He was the closest thing I had to a father figure now. He had always told me, "If you're ever in a jam you can't get out of, you call me, day or night." It was 300 my time, which meant it was early afternoon back home. I found a secure line, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed the number I knew by heart. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and familiar. "Robert Vance." "Mr. Vance, it's Brenda Miller," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Brenda, it's good to hear your voice. Everything all right over there?" "No, sir," I said, the dam of my composure finally breaking. "Not at all." I explained everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and disbelief. The cabin, Jessica, the email, the wire transfer. He listened patiently, letting me vent, the silence on his end of the line a comforting presence. When I finally got to the power of attorney and the jurisdictional clause, the silence stretched for a beat longer. Then I heard him let out a low whistle. "Brenda," he said, his voice now tight with professional focus, "read me that clause verbatim." I did. I could hear the faint sound of him typing on his keyboard. "Okay," he said after a moment. "This is interesting, very interesting." "What does it mean?" I asked, my hope a fragile thing. "It means, Captain Miller," he said, and I could hear the hint of a smile in his voice, "that your sister may have committed felony fraud." He explained it in simple terms. While the document gave her power, that power was geographically restricted. The moment I was physically outside the borders of the United States, its validity could be legally challenged. For her to sign a contract on my behalf, she was attesting that she had the legal authority to do so at that moment. But if my physical location at the time of signing nullified her authority, then my signature, the one she provided via the POA, was fraudulent. "She bet on you not knowing," Robert said, his voice hard. "She bet on you being too far away and too distracted to look at the fine print. She used your service against you." A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. It wasn't just a feeling of powerlessness anymore. I had a weapon. "What do we do?" I asked. "First," he said, "do not touch that money. Do not acknowledge it. Do not reply to your sister's email. As of this moment, you are officially incommunicado with her. Second, I need you to get me proof of your deployment. Your official orders, a letter from your anything that definitively places you outside the US on the date of the sale. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," I said, a fresh wave of determination hardening my voice. "I can." "Good," Robert said, "because we're just going to get the cabin back, Brenda. We're going to make sure Jessica understands that a person's legacy isn't something you can just sell." The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The next few weeks were a masterclass in patience and precision, a military operation conducted via encrypted emails and secure satellite calls. While my platoon was running drills in the desert, Robert Vance and I were waging a quiet war on a legal battlefield 6,000 miles away. My first task was to establish the official, undeniable timeline. Getting my deployment orders was simple. I had copies of everything. I sent them to Robert via a secure military email channel. The documents clearly stated my date of departure and the duration of my tour, stamping my location firmly outside the United States for the entire period in question. This was our cornerstone. Robert, meanwhile, began his work back home. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had dismantled multi-million-dollar corporate structures for a living. First, he went to the county courthouse. He pulled the deed transfer and the sale documents for the cabin. As he suspected, the closing paperwork was signed by Jessica Miller as agent for Brenda Miller. It was the smoking gun. He sent me scans of the documents. Seeing my name signed by her hand, a sloppy imitation of my own signature next to the legal attestation, sent a fresh jolt of anger through me. It was so brazen, so arrogant. "She used a cut-rate title company," Robert explained over the phone one night, the connection crackling with static. "Probably one her real estate friends recommended. They likely saw the power of attorney document, saw it was notarized, and didn't look any deeper. They just wanted to close the deal and get their commission. It was sloppy, but her sloppiness is our advantage." The next step was to understand the buyers, the Peterson family. Robert was adamant that we approach this carefully. "They are likely innocent parties in this, Brenda," he cautioned. "They bought the property in good faith. We don't want to make them the enemy, we want to make them our allies." He did a light background check, nothing invasive, just public records. Liam and Sarah Peterson were both middle school teachers. They had 2 young children. They had taken out a significant mortgage to buy the cabin. They weren't wealthy developers. They were a family who had likely sunk their life savings into what they thought was their dream vacation home. This complicated things emotionally, but it clarified our strategy. If we went in with guns blazing, they would fight back, and we'd be tied up in court for years. We had to present them with a situation where helping us was also the best way to help themselves. The most crucial piece of the puzzle, however, was Jessica's financial trail. Robert hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur, to see where the money had gone. Because the sale was a matter of public record, the amount was easy to find. Jessica had sold the cabin for about 15% under market value. She wanted a quick sale, not the best price, Robert noted. Another sign of desperation. Arthur started digging. It didn't take him long to find what Jessica had done with her half of the proceeds. She hadn't invested it. She hadn't saved it. She had spent it, extravagantly. There were credit card receipts for designer clothes, a down payment on a flashy new luxury SUV, and a first-class ticket to Bali for a social media retreat. She was living out a fantasy, broadcasting her newfound success all over her social media profiles. I forced myself to look at her page. There she was, posing in a designer bikini by an infinity pool, the caption reading, "Living my best life. Hard work pays off. Boss babe # manifesting my dreams." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost comical. She was hashtagging about hard work while spending the proceeds from a stolen inheritance. The wire transfer to my account remained untouched. Robert's instructions were clear. That money was poison. Accepting it would be seen as tacit approval of the sale. We had to treat it as the evidence it was. The final piece was putting together the legal notice. Robert drafted a letter to be sent to the title company, the Petersons' lawyer, and most importantly, to Jessica. It was a masterpiece of legal threat, written in calm, devastating language. It laid out the facts in inarguable detail: my deployment, the geographically limited power of attorney, the fraudulent signature, and the illegal sale. It stated that the sale of the cabin was null and void. It demanded an immediate reversal of the title and declared that any funds from the sale were considered unlawfully obtained. "This letter is the opening shot," Robert told me. "We're not filing a lawsuit yet. We're giving them an opportunity to fix this without a protracted court battle. We're showing them our hand, and our hand is a Roya." L. Flush. I read the draft, and a slow, cold sense of satisfaction began to build inside me. The fog of powerlessness was gone, burned away by the clear light of a well-executed plan. The paper trail was complete. Every lie Jessica had told, every corner she had cut, was now a neatly documented fact. The homecoming was still months away, but the groundwork for justice was being laid, one meticulously gathered document at a time. The remaining months of my deployment were the longest of my life. Every day felt like a week, every week a month. The knowledge of what was waiting for me back home was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my daily duties. Robert and I had a strategy, and it depended on one thing: timing. We served the legal notices 1 month before my scheduled return. We wanted the shockwave to hit while I was still safely out of reach, unable to be harassed or emotionally manipulated by Jessica. The response was immediate and chaotic. The title company was the first to panic. Their legal department, realizing the extent of their liability in facilitating a fraudulent transaction, immediately went on the defensive. Their insurance carrier was notified, and suddenly they were very interested in finding a swift resolution. They had failed in their due diligence, and Robert made it clear they were on the hook for it. The Petersons, through their lawyer, responded with confusion and distress. They were exactly who we thought they were: an innocent family caught in the crossfire. They had already started making memories at the cabin. Their kids had picked out their bunks. Their lawyer was professional, and after reviewing the evidence we provided, my deployment orders being the irrefutable centerpiece, he advised them that their claim to the title was, at best, precarious. Their best course of action was to pursue a claim against the title insurance they had purchased and demand a full refund. They were victims of Jessica's fraud just as much as I was. Robert opened a channel of communication with their lawyer, framing us as allies against a common problem. We didn't want their money, we just wanted our home back. Jessica's reaction, however, was pure meltdown. She called Robert's office, screaming. She sent him a barrage of threatening emails, accusing him of betraying our family and trying to ruin her life. She tried to contact me, but I had blocked her number and all her social media profiles. As Robert had instructed, I maintained complete radio silence. Her panic was palpable even from thousands of miles away. In her angry voicemails, which Robert forwarded to me, she unwittingly confessed to everything. "I needed that money. Brenda was never even using the cabin. It's not fair. You can't do this to me," she shrieked. Each message was another nail in her legal coffin. The forensic accountant, Arthur, discovered she had already spent over 70% of her share. The new SUV, the trip, the designer wardrobe, it was all gone. She had no way to pay the money back. She was trapped. The plan for my return, what Robert called the homecoming gambit, was simple and brutal. I would not go to my apartment. I would not see any friends. The day I landed back on U.S. soil, Robert would pick me up from the base. From there, we would drive directly to the cabin. Simultaneously, Robert's paralegal would serve Jessica with a formal eviction notice at her apartment. The notice would be for the Petersons, technically, but a copy would go to Jessica, informing her that the original owner was retaking possession of the property, which had been determined to be unlawfully occupied. The goal was a confrontation on my terms, on my turf. The flight home was surreal. As the plane descended over the green, tree-covered landscape of my home state, a place I hadn't seen in nearly a year, my heart was a knot of anxiety and grim determination. I changed out of my uniform and into civilian clothes in the airport restroom. When I walked out, Robert was waiting for me. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He gave me a firm, supportive hug. "Ready, Captain?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The drive to the cabin was quiet. We went over the plan one last time. The Petersons had been cooperative. Through their lawyer, they had agreed to vacate the property and hand over the keys to Robert, pending the full refund from their title insurance. They just wanted to be done with the whole mess. They had left the keys under a loose stone by the back porch, a place only my family knew about. As we turned onto the long, gravel driveway leading up to the cabin, my breath caught in my throat. It looked the same, nestled among the towering pines, a plume of smoke curling lazily from the stone chimney. My stomach churned. Someone was inside. "She's here," I said, my voice low. "I expected as much," Robert said calmly. "She's either squatting or trying to remove things. Doesn't matter. Law is on our side." He parked the car a little way down the drive, partially hidden by the trees. "Let's go," he said. "Time to reclaim your home." Walking up the path my father had laid with river stones, every step felt heavy with meaning. This wasn't just a confrontation with my sister. It was a reckoning with her betrayal, a fight for the physical embodiment of my family's soul. I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. I was home. And I was ready for the final battle. I retrieved the key from under the loose stone by the back porch, its cold, familiar weight a small comfort in my hand. Robert stood beside me, a silent, imposing presence in his dark suit. He had a thick file folder tucked under his arm, a physical representation of the case we had meticulously built. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a familiar click. For a moment, I paused with my hand on the doorknob, gathering my strength. Then, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me was a bizarre tableau of desecration and denial. Jessica was in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. But she wasn't packing our family's belongings. She was packing things she had bought. A new, garishly modern television was off its stand, ready to be boxed. Sleek, minimalist furniture that clashed horribly with the cabin's rustic charm was stacked against a wall. The old, comfortable armchair where my father used to read was gone, replaced by a white leather monstrosity. She had been treating our childhood home like her personal storage unit and showroom. She spun around as the door opened, a cardboard box in her hands. When she saw me, her face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, fear, and then a flash of defiant anger. "Brenda," she breathed, her eyes wide. "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be back for." "My deployment ended," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I came home." Robert stepped in behind me, closing the door with a quiet thud that seemed to echo in the room. Jessica's eyes darted to him, then back to me. The bravado kicked in, her default defense mechanism. "You can't just barge in here," she snapped, setting the box down. This is private property." "You're right," Robert said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "It is, and you're trespassing." He stepped forward and placed the file folder on the large wooden dining table that our father had built. He opened it, revealing the top document, a legally binding eviction notice issued by the county sheriff's department. "This property was sold illegally," Robert stated, not looking at Jessica but at the document. "The sale was based on a fraudulent signature, executed via a power of attorney that was not valid at the time of the transaction. The sale has been voided. The title is being restored to its rightful owners, Brenda Miller and the estate of Jessica Miller's claim, which is now subject to significant legal and financial encumbrances." Jessica stared at the paper, her face pale. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is my house too." "No, it's not," I said, finally letting the cold anger I had suppressed for months seep into my voice. "Not anymore. A house is something you care for, something you protect. You don't sell it out from under your family while they're overseas. You turned it into cash for a vacation and a new car. You sold Dad's memory, Mom's garden, every summer we ever spent here. For what? For Instagram likes." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. "You don't understand," she cried. "I had nothing. You had your career, your perfect, respectable life. I was struggling. I needed a start. A start? I took a step closer, my voice dropping. You had a start. You had a family. You had a home that you could have come to any time. You had a sister who paid every bill for this place without ever asking you for a dime. The only thing you were struggling with was your own greed. Robert cleared his throat. Ms. Miller, he said, addressing Jessica formally. The Peterson family has been fully refunded by the title company. The title company's insurance is now coming for you to recoup their losses. On top of that, I have here a full accounting of the money you illegally obtained. You will be sued for that amount, plus legal fees and damages. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from this property. Anything left after that will be considered abandoned. The reality of her situation finally seemed to land. The color drained from her face. She wasn't just losing the cabin, she was facing financial ruin. The life she had fabricated for her online followers was about to implode. She sank onto one of the packing boxes, her head in her hands. My car, she mumbled. They'll take my car. They will, Robert confirmed, and that's the best case C. Nario, we have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, perjury. Brenda has been gracious enough to offer you this civil path. I suggest you take it. I looked around the room at the cheap, trendy junk she had used to replace our history. It was all superficial, all meaningless. She had tried to erase me, and replace it all with a hollow, curated version of a life. But the cabin was stronger than that. Its bones, the log walls my father had set, the stone hearth he had built, were still there. Get your things, Jessica, I said, my voice flat. And then get out. You have 24 hours. She didn't look at me. She just sat there, amidst the wreckage of her own making, a stranger in the house where we had once been sisters. I felt no pity. I felt no satisfaction. I just felt a profound, aching emptiness where our family used to be. The confrontation was over. The real work, the work of rebuilding, was about to begin. The 24 hours I gave Jessica were the quietest, most tense hours of my life. I didn't stay at the cabin. I couldn't. It felt tainted, violated. Robert booked me a room at a quiet hotel in the nearest town. I slept for 12 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure emotional and physical exhaustion. When I woke, the world felt clearer, sharper. The next morning, Robert and I drove back to the cabin. Jessica's flashy SUV was gone. The front door was unlocked, left slightly ajar. We stepped inside to find that she had taken everything she had brought into the house: the ugly white chair, the oversized TV, the cheap modern furniture. But she had also taken more. I walked through the rooms in a daze. Small, sentimental things were missing. A set of hand-carved wooden birds our grandfather had made, our mother's favorite reading lamp, a box of old photographs that had been kept in the hall closet. These things had no monetary value, but they were priceless. It was a final, petty act of cruelty, a last twist of the knife. She hadn't just taken the money, she had taken the memories too. The anger I felt was different this time. It wasn't hot and explosive, but a cold, heavy certainty. My sister, the person I had grown up with, was gone. The person who remained was a stranger, someone I no longer knew and had no desire to. Robert handled the legal fallout with ruthless efficiency. The title company, under threat of a massive lawsuit, paid the Peterson family back in full and covered all of our legal fees. Their insurance company then filed a civil suit against Jessica to recoup their losses. They garnished her wages from the part-time job she had to get and put a lien on all her assets. The SUV was repossessed. Her social media went dark. The last I heard, she had moved 2 states away to live with a friend, her life of luxury and lies dismantled. I never pursued criminal charges. Seeing her life implode under the weight of her own choices felt like a more fitting justice than a prison sentence. The silence from her was total. I had lost a sister, but I had come to realize I had lost her long before she sold the cabin. The first few weeks back were about reclaiming the space. I hired a cleaning crew to scrub the cabin from top to bottom, as if to wash away the memory of her presence. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh pine-scented air circulate through the rooms. I found an old armchair at an antique shop that looked almost identical to my father's and placed it by the fireplace. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to fill the empty spaces. I visited the Petersons. I found them in their small suburban home, still reeling from the ordeal. I apologized for the trouble Jessica had caused them. Sarah Peterson cried and said they had used all their savings for the down payment. On a soldier's salary, I didn't have much, but I wrote them a check for a portion of what they had lost. It wasn't everything, but it was what I could do. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to mend a small piece of the damage my family had caused. That first winter at the cabin was long and quiet. I spent my weekends there alone, rediscovering the peace of the forest. I learned to enjoy the solitude, to find comfort in the quiet creak of the floorboards and the crackle of the fire. I read my father's old books and tended to the remnants of my mother's garden. I was healing, and so was the house. One afternoon, while cleaning out the dusty attic, I found a box I had never seen before. It was filled with my mother's journals and more old photographs, ones Jessica had missed. I sat on the dusty floor and read for hours, losing myself in my mother's elegant handwriting. She wrote about her dreams for the cabin, her love for my father, her hopes for her 2 daughters. In one entry, written shortly after Jessica was born, she wrote, "I hope they will always be each other's closest friend. I hope they will always protect each other." A single tear traced a path through the dust on my cheek. The cabin wasn't just a building of wood and stone anymore. It was a testament to resilience. It had survived a betrayal, and so had I. My foundation had been shattered, but I had rebuilt it, stronger and on my own terms. I had Robert, my father's truest friend. I had my career. And I had this place, this legacy that I had fought to reclaim. I looked out the attic window at the snow-covered trees, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow on the landscape. It was a new beginning. The past would always be a part of me, a scar that would never fully fade, but it would no longer define my future. I closed the journal, carefully placed it back in the box, and went downstairs to put another log on the fire. The house was warm, it was safe, and it was mine.